So this is what you've become? Trevor's voice cut through the elegant ballroom like a rusty knife, his words slurring slightly from the champagne he couldn't afford. A cheap woman with a bastard daughter. Naomi's hand froze on her wine glass, her spine straightening with the kind of dignity that comes from surviving hell. Across the table, her 12-year-old daughter Zara's eyes filled with tears, her small hand clutching the metal around her neck. The entire section of the gala went silent, crystal chandeliers casting judgment on the shabby man in the borrowed suit. Before Trevor could spit out another word, a deep voice, calm as a judge and cold as winter, cut through the tension like a blade. "I'm going to give you exactly 5 seconds to apologize to my wife and my daughter," Julian said, rising to his full 6'3" height, his custom tuxedo and commanding presence making Trevor look like a beggar, or what happens next will be the biggest regret of your miserable life. Trevor's face went pale, and what happened next will shock you. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our dramatic stories. And to my loyal family who've been rocking with us, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. 10 years. 10 years since Trevor had walked out on Naomi when she was 3 months pregnant, telling her the baby was her problem and that he was too young to be trapped. 10 years since he'd signed divorce papers without looking back, already entangled with Nicole, the daughter of a wealthy businessman who promised to fund Trevor's brilliant startup ideas. Now, Trevor stood in the Grand Meridian Ballroom wearing a suit borrowed from his roommate, nursing his 3rd glass of free champagne, and watching his past collide with his present in the most humiliating way possible. Naomi. She sat at a VIP table near the front of the ballroom, looking like everything he'd once had and thrown away. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo with gold accessories catching the light. She wore a deep emerald dress that spoke of taste and wealth, laughing at something the distinguished man beside her said. And next to her sat a young girl, 12 years old, if Trevor's math was correct, beautiful and poised in a way that made his chest tight with something he refused to name. "Man, let it go," Marcus, Trevor's only remaining friend, muttered beside him. "We came here to network, not to dig up graves." But Trevor couldn't let it go. The bitterness that had festered for a decade bubbled up, made worse by the champagne and the stark contrast between Naomi's obvious success and his own spectacular failures. His brilliant startup had crashed within 2 years. Nicole's father had pulled funding when he discovered Trevor was all talk and no talent. Nicole herself had divorced him 4 years ago, taking what little he had left in a vicious settlement. Now Trevor lived in a shared apartment, worked irregular consulting gigs, and was at this charity gala, desperately hoping to network his way into a decent job. And there was Naomi, glowing like she'd never known hardship, like she hadn't cried and begged him to stay, like she hadn't been left alone and pregnant. The injustice of it burned in his throat worse than the cheap champagne. "I'm going over there," Trevor announced, setting down his glass with more force than necessary. "Trevor, don't." Marcus grabbed his arm, but Trevor shook him off. He wove through the well-dressed crowd, his borrowed suit suddenly feeling too tight, too obvious. People glanced at him. These society types could always smell someone who didn't belong. Their eyes slid over him with polite dismissal, returning to their conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Trevor reached Naomi's table just as she was laughing at something, her face radiant with genuine joy. The sight made his stomach churn with resentment. "Naomi," he said loudly, wanting to disrupt that perfect moment. "It's been a long time." She looked up, and for just a second he saw recognition and something else flash across her face. Not fear, not longing, but something closer to pity. That look enraged him more than hatred would have. "Trevor," she said calmly, her voice measured, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Why not? These events are open to everyone." He was aware his words were coming out aggressive, hostile. Good. Let her feel uncomfortable for once. The man beside her, tall, well-built, with silver threading through his dark hair, studied Trevor with the kind of gaze that saw everything and judged accordingly. "And who's this?" Trevor gestured with his champagne glass toward the young girl, knowing exactly who she was, but wanting to hurt anyway. "Your daughter from some other poor fool who figured out what you really are?" The girl flinched, her eyes dropping to her lap where her hands twisted together. Naomi's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Trevor's champagne-loosened tongue kept running. "So this is what you've become? A cheap woman with a bastard daughter." The words hung in the air like poison. Conversations around them stopped mid-sentence. Even the string quartet seemed to falter. Trevor stood there, swaying slightly, his face flushed with alcohol and malice, finally feeling like he'd landed a blow. Naomi's face remained composed, but her daughter's tears spilled over, silent and devastating. Then the man beside Naomi stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply rose to his full, imposing height, his presence commanding immediate attention. His dark eyes fixed on Trevor with the kind of cold fury that makes strong men reconsider their choices. "I'm going to give you exactly 5 seconds to apologize to my wife and my daughter," Julian said, his voice carrying across the now silent section of the ballroom, "or what happens next will be the biggest regret of your miserable life." Trevor's champagne fog began to clear as he really looked at the man for the first time. Recognition dawned slowly, horribly. The distinguished features, the commanding presence, the custom tuxedo with subtle JCP monogrammed on the cuff. Julian Pierce. Julian Pierce, tech mogul worth an estimated $3.2 billion. Julian Pierce, whose foundation funded education initiatives across 3 continents. Julian Pierce, whose company Trevor had applied to work for just last week in the janitorial department. Trevor's mouth went dry. His eyes darted around the ballroom, seeing it properly now. The banner at the front, Pierce Foundation Annual Charity Gala. The VIP table where Naomi sat, the security personnel already moving toward him at some invisible signal from Julian. "Aye," Trevor started, but his voice cracked. 5 seconds, Julian repeated, pulling out his phone with deliberate calm, "and they're almost up." Naomi placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, whispering something that made the girl nod. Then Naomi looked at Trevor, and her eyes held no anger, only a terrible, damning peace. "You have no idea what you just walked into, do you?" Naomi said quietly. "You never could see past your own bitterness to recognize what was right in front of you." Trevor's knees felt weak. Around them, he could hear whispers, his name being passed along, recognition spreading like wildfire. These people knew who he was. They knew what he'd done, and they knew exactly who Naomi had become. Security materialized around Trevor like shadows given form. 3 men in crisp black suits, positioned but not yet touching him. Julian hadn't even looked at them. They'd simply appeared at his subtle signal, a testament to the kind of power money and respect commanded. Trevor's hands trembled as he set down his champagne glass on the nearest table. The alcohol that had given him courage now made his thoughts sluggish, his reactions too slow for the situation spiraling out of his control. "Mr. Pierce, I didn't realize," Trevor stammered. "You didn't realize this was my event?" Julian's voice remained calm, almost conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You didn't realize this was my wife? Or you didn't realize that young lady you just called a bastard is my daughter?" The word daughter hit Trevor like a physical blow. He looked at the girl, Zara, really looked at her. She had Naomi's eyes, but there was something else in her face. Intelligence, strength, grace that he'd never possessed. "She's not your daughter," Trevor said stupidly. She's mine in every way that matters," Julian interrupted, his hand moving to rest protectively on Zara's shoulder. "I adopted her legally 7 years ago. I've raised her, loved her, protected her. What have you done?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Naomi finally spoke, her voice steady and clear. "Trevor, you walked away 10 years ago when I was 3 months pregnant. You told me the baby was my problem. You divorced me and left me with nothing. No money, no car, no support. Do you remember that?" Trevor's face flushed. Of course he remembered, but hearing it said aloud in front of hundreds of wealthy, influential people made shame crawl up his spine. "I was young," he muttered. "I wasn't ready." "You were 28 years old," Naomi cut him off sharply. "Not a child, a grown man who made a choice. So let me tell you what happened after you left." She stood, her emerald dress catching the light, and Trevor was struck by how different she looked. Not just older, but transformed. The broken woman who'd begged him to stay was gone, replaced by someone who commanded attention without demanding it. I was homeless for 6 months, Naomi said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. I slept in my car, your old car actually, the one you said wasn't worth taking. I was 7 months pregnant, and it was December. I worked 3 jobs while pregnant because you disappeared completely. No child support, no contact, nothing. Trevor's throat tightened. He'd known it would be hard for her, but he'd convinced himself it wasn't his problem. Nicole had been there, promising him a better life, telling him that Naomi was trying to trap him with a baby. I gave birth alone, Naomi continued. My mother tried to help, but she was working herself to the bone too. When Zara was 2 months old, I was working a night shift at a diner, studying for my GED during breaks, and selling plasma for extra money. Naomi, Trevor tried to interrupt, but Julian's cold gaze silenced him. Let her finish, Julian said quietly. I built my life from nothing, Naomi said. I got my high school diploma, then my bachelor's degree in business administration, then my MBA. I worked my way up from receptionist to director of operations at a nonprofit. That's where I met Julian, at a community center where I volunteered on weekends, teaching single mothers how to create budgets and build credit. She smiled at her husband, and the love between them was so obvious it made Trevor's chest ache with something ugly and familiar: envy. Julian didn't see a broken woman with a bastard child, Naomi said, turning back to Trevor. He saw a woman of strength, character, and determination. He saw my daughter not as a burden, but as a blessing. He courted us both, loved us both, and gave us both his name. Julian spoke again, his voice still measured but laced with steel. I met Naomi 8 years ago. She was working 3 jobs and raising Zara alone, and she was the most impressive woman I'd ever encountered. Strong, kind, dignified. Everything you clearly couldn't appreciate. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. But let's talk about you, Trevor. You want to know why your life fell apart after you left Naomi? Trevor's stomach dropped. I don't. Your startup failed because you had no real skills, just arrogance. Julian continued, reading from his phone. Your second wife divorced you 4 years ago after discovering you'd been lying about your financial situation. You've been fired from 3 jobs in 5 years for incompetence and poor character. And you're currently living in a shared apartment in Queens, barely making rent. Each word was a hammer blow. Trevor glanced around desperately and realized that people were recording this on their phones. By tomorrow, this humiliation would be everywhere. How do you know all this? Trevor whispered. Because you applied for a job at my company last week, Julian said simply. Janitorial position, entry level. I review every application personally for positions that require background checks. And imagine my surprise when I saw your name and realized you were the man who abandoned my wife and daughter. Trevor's vision swam. The job, the interview scheduled for next week. It was with Pierce Industries, with Julian's company. I was going to reject your application outright, Julian continued. But my daughter, he looked down at Zara with such obvious love it made Trevor want to disappear. My daughter asked me to reconsider. She said everyone deserves a chance at redemption. Zara spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. I asked my dad to watch you tonight, to see what kind of man you really are. And you've shown us exactly who you are, Julian said. A bitter, cruel man who would insult a child, his own biological child, to make himself feel better about his failures. Trevor opened his mouth, but no words came. What could he say? Everything Julian said was true. Here's what's going to happen, Julian said, his tone shifting to pure business. You're going to apologize to my wife and my daughter, a real apology, not the half-hearted excuse forming in your head right now. Then you're going to leave this event quietly, and on Monday morning you're going to report to Pierce Industries for your job interview. Trevor's head snapped up. What? My daughter believes in second chances, Julian said. So, against my better judgment, I'm going to give you one. But understand this. You'll be working for the family you abandoned. You'll see daily what you could have had if you'd been a real man. And if you ever speak to or about my family with anything less than complete respect, I will not only fire you, I will make sure you never work anywhere in this city again. The threat was delivered calmly, but Trevor didn't doubt for a second that Julian could and would do exactly that. Now apologize, Julian commanded. Trevor looked at Naomi, at the woman he'd abandoned, who'd rebuilt herself into someone extraordinary. Then at Zara, at the daughter he'd rejected, who somehow still had enough grace to give him a chance. His knees buckled, and he found himself kneeling on the expensive ballroom floor, tears burning his eyes. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." The ballroom remained frozen in uncomfortable silence as Trevor knelt on the floor, his cheap suit wrinkling at the knees, tears cutting tracks down his face. Around them, phones were still recording, capturing every second of his humiliation. Zara looked at her mother, and some silent communication passed between them. Naomi nodded slightly, and Zara stood from her chair with the poise of someone far older than 12. "Stand up," Zara said quietly to Trevor. "You don't need to kneel." Trevor stumbled to his feet, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Up close, he could see more of himself in Zara's features. The shape of her nose, the curve of her jaw, but everything else about her was pure Naomi. The strength in her spine, the clarity in her eyes, the grace in her movements. "Do you know what I won tonight?" Zara asked, touching the medal hanging around her neck. It was gold, engraved with intricate designs Trevor couldn't make out from where he stood. He shook his head mutely. "The International Youth Science Excellence Award," Zara said. "I'm the youngest person ever to receive it. I was in Geneva last month presenting my research on renewable energy solutions for developing nations." Trevor's mouth fell open. "You're 12 years old." "I'm 12 years old," Zara agreed. "I also graduated high school last year. I started MIT next fall on a full scholarship. I've published 2 peer-reviewed papers, and I speak 4 languages." Each accomplishment was another dagger to Trevor's chest. This brilliant, accomplished child, his biological daughter, had achieved more by 12 than he'd achieved in his entire 42 years. "I used to wonder about you," Zara continued, her voice steady but soft. "When I was little, I'd ask Mom why my biological father didn't want to meet me, why he left, if it was something I did wrong before I was even born." "Zara," Naomi started to intervene, but Zara shook her head. "It's okay, Mom. I need to say this." She turned back to Trevor. "I cried a lot about it when I was younger. I felt incomplete, like there was something wrong with me that made you leave." Trevor's chest constricted with guilt so powerful it felt like drowning. "But then my dad, my real dad." She glanced at Julian with obvious love. He explained something to me. He said that biology is just biology. It doesn't make someone a father. What makes someone a father is showing up, protecting, teaching, loving, choosing to be there even when it's hard. She straightened her shoulders, and Trevor saw his daughter, not as the crying child he'd expected, but as a young woman of remarkable character. "You gave me life," Zara said, "and I'm grateful for that. But you didn't give me love. You didn't give me your name or your protection or your time. My dad did all of that." She paused, then added with devastating simplicity, "So thank you for making room for a real father to find me." The words hit Trevor like a physical blow. Around them, he could hear sniffles from other guests, women dabbing at their eyes, men clearing their throats uncomfortably. Julian stood and placed both hands on Zara's shoulders. "That's my girl," he said with unmistakable pride. "Strong and gracious, just like your mother." A woman's voice cut through the moment. "Naomi, is that really you?" An elegantly dressed black woman in her 60s pushed through the crowd, her face a mixture of joy and protective anger. Trevor recognized her immediately. Mama Sarah, Naomi's mother. "Mama," Naomi said, standing to embrace her mother. Mama Sarah hugged her daughter fiercely, then turned to look at Trevor. Her expression could have frozen fire. "So you finally showed your face," Mama Sarah said coldly. 10 years, and you choose tonight to crawl out from whatever rock you've been hiding under." "Mrs. Johnson, Don't Mrs. Johnson me," Mama Sarah snapped. "I found my daughter sleeping in a car 7 months pregnant in December. In a car, Trevor, because you took everything and left her with nothing." She stepped closer, and despite being a head shorter than Trevor, she seemed to tower over him with righteous fury. "I watched her work herself sick trying to provide for that baby. I watched her cry herself to sleep, wondering how she'd afford diapers and formula. I watched her sacrifice everything, her youth, her dreams, her health, all because you were too much of a coward to be a man." "I know," Trevor whispered. "I know I failed her." "You didn't just fail her," Mama Sarah said. "You failed yourself. You failed at being human." She turned to Julian and Zara. But God has a way of replacing what the locusts destroy. My daughter and granddaughter got the man and father they deserved. You got exactly what you earned. Nothing. A distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit approached the group. Julian, Naomi, my apologies for interrupting. He glanced at Trevor with barely concealed disdain. I just wanted to congratulate young Zara again on her remarkable achievement. Thank you, Mr. Chen, Julian said warmly. Mr. Chen continued, still looking at Trevor. You know, I actually interviewed this gentleman for a position at my firm about 3 years ago. Didn't hire him. He paused meaningfully. When we do background checks, we look at more than just job history. We look at character. And a man who abandons his pregnant wife? He shook his head. That tells us everything we need to know about how he'll treat his colleagues, his clients, his responsibilities. Trevor's face burned. So that was why he couldn't get decent work. His abandonment of Naomi had followed him like a shadow, a stain on his character that no amount of charm could wash away. Another voice joined the conversation, this time a woman in a designer dress. I heard what happened from my husband. Trevor, you worked for him briefly, didn't you? Before he let you go for falsifying expense reports? The humiliations piled up, one after another. Person after person from Trevor's past emerged from the crowd, each one revealing another failure, another burned bridge, another consequence of his choices. And through it all, Naomi stood tall and dignified, Julian protective at her side, Zara poised and unshaken. They didn't gloat or pile on. They didn't need to. The truth spoke for itself. Finally, Julian raised his hand and the crowd quieted. I think Mr. Davidson has heard enough for one evening. Trevor, your interview is Monday at 9 a.m. Don't be late. Trevor nodded numbly, turning to leave, but Zara's voice stopped him one more time. Trevor? She'd never called him Dad, he realized. Just his name. I hope you learned something from all this. I really do. Because being bitter about other people's success won't fix your failures. Only you can do that. At 12 years old, his daughter had more wisdom than he'd accumulated in 4 decades. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and cold rain that matched Trevor's mood perfectly. He stood outside Pierce Industries headquarters, a gleaming 40-story tower of glass and steel in downtown Manhattan, wearing the only suit he owned that wasn't borrowed. It was 5 years old, slightly too tight around the middle, and the hem of the pants was frayed. But it was his, and that felt important somehow. The building's lobby was intimidating, all marble and modern art, with security stations that looked like they belonged in a government facility. Young professionals in expensive clothes moved with purpose, their badges swinging from lanyards, their conversations full of tech jargon and confidence. Trevor approached the security desk, feeling every bit the imposter he was. Trevor Davidson, he said to the guard, I have a 9 a.m. interview. The guard checked his computer, then handed Trevor a visitor badge. 23rd floor. Janitorial services. Elevators are to your left. Janitorial services. The word sat heavy in Trevor's stomach as he rode the elevator up. He'd once mocked people who did this kind of work, considered himself above manual labor. Now he was grateful just to have the opportunity. The 23rd floor was less glamorous than the lobby. Industrial carpet, fluorescent lighting, metal desks, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor waited for him at the reception area. Mr. Davidson, I'm Mrs. Patricia Hughes, head of facilities management. Follow me. She led him to a small conference room and gestured for him to sit. Instead of beginning the interview, she folded her hands and looked at him directly. Mr. Pierce instructed me to conduct this interview personally, she said. He also told me everything about your history with his wife and daughter. Trevor's face heated with shame. Now I've been with this company for 15 years, Mrs. Hughes continued, and I've never seen Mr. Pierce take such a personal interest in a janitorial hire. So let me be clear. You're not here because of your qualifications. You're here because a 12-year-old girl has more grace and mercy in her little finger than most adults have in their entire bodies. I know, Trevor said quietly. Do you? Because I need to know that you understand what you're walking into. You'll be cleaning offices, including Mr. Pierce's office. You'll be maintaining floors that his wife walks across when she visits. You'll see their family photos on his desk, her awards on the walls. Can you handle that? Trevor thought about it honestly. Could he handle seeing daily reminders of what he'd thrown away, of what Naomi had become without him? I have to, he finally said. I don't have anywhere else to go. No one else will hire me. That's not the answer I'm looking for, Mrs. Hughes said sharply. I didn't ask if you're desperate. I asked if you can handle it. Trevor met her eyes. I can handle it because I need to see it. I need to see what a real man builds, what real love looks like, because I obviously never learned. Mrs. Hughes studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, that's better. The job is $11 an hour, 40 hours a week. You'll work second shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. You get a 30-minute unpaid lunch break and 2 15-minute paid breaks. You'll report to me directly. She slid a paper across the table. These are the additional conditions Mr. Pierce has attached to your employment. Read them carefully. Trevor scanned the document. Standard employee policies, but then at the bottom, 3 special conditions. Mandatory twice-weekly sessions with the company's Employee Assistance Program counselor. Mandatory volunteer work, 4 hours every Saturday at the Mother's Grace Center, a shelter for single mothers. Zero tolerance policy. Any disrespect toward or about the Pierce family results in immediate termination without severance. Do you agree to these terms? Mrs. Hughes asked. Trevor signed without hesitation. Yes. Good. You start tomorrow. Show up 15 minutes early. Bring your social security card and ID for HR paperwork. And Mr. Davidson? She fixed him with a stern look. Don't make me regret giving you a chance. I won't, Trevor promised, and for the first time in years, he meant it. 6 months crawled by with painful slowness. Trevor cleaned offices, mopped floors, emptied trash bins. He scrubbed toilets used by people who made in a day what he made in a month. He smiled and nodded when employees walked past him without acknowledgement, as if he were furniture. The work was humbling, exhausting, sometimes humiliating, but he showed up every day, on time, sober. He did his work without complaint. And twice a week, he sat in Dr. Martinez's office and slowly, painfully unpacked the toxic masculinity, fear, and selfishness that had ruined his life. You were raised to believe that asking for help was weakness, Dr. Martinez said during one session. That providing financially was the only thing that mattered, that emotions were for women. Where did those beliefs get you? Alone, Trevor admitted. Broke. Hated. And what are you learning now? That real strength is admitting when you're wrong. That real provision is emotional, not just financial. That real men don't abandon, they build. The sessions were harder than any physical labor, facing what he'd done, why he'd done it, and how to be different. It felt like reconstructing himself from the foundation up. The volunteer work at Mother's Grace Center was even harder. Every Saturday, Trevor served meals to single mothers, played with their children, and listened to stories that sounded horrifyingly like Naomi's. Women abandoned while pregnant, women working multiple jobs, women sleeping in cars, in shelters, in fear. One Saturday, a young woman named Lisa approached him. She was 25, 7 months pregnant, working 2 jobs after her boyfriend disappeared. You're different from the other volunteers, she observed. You listen like you understand. Trevor hesitated, then decided on honesty. I was the boyfriend who disappeared. I abandoned my pregnant girlfriend 10 years ago. I'm here because I'm trying to learn how to be better. Lisa's eyes widened. You admit that? Out loud? I have to, Trevor said. Hiding from it didn't make it go away. It just made everything worse. She studied him for a moment. Did she ever forgive you? I don't know, Trevor said honestly. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I'm trying to deserve a second chance. Word spread through the shelter about the volunteer who'd once been that guy, the deadbeat dad trying to make amends. Some women refused to speak to him. Others watched him warily. But some, like Lisa, seemed to appreciate his honesty. Meanwhile, at Pierce Industries, something unexpected happened. Employees who'd initially ignored Trevor began to notice his consistency, his quiet competence, the way he stayed late to finish a job properly, the way he never complained or made excuses. Mrs. Hughes called him into her office one afternoon. You've been here 6 months, she said. No incidents. Good work. The counseling reports are positive. She paused. Mr. Pierce has approved promoting you to day shift supervisor. It comes with a raise and some management responsibilities. Trevor's eyes widened. I don't understand. I'm supposed to be in janitorial for a year. You are, but supervisor is still janitorial. just with more responsibility. She handed him a new contract. $16 an hour. You'd manage a team of 4 people. Same conditions apply. Counseling, volunteer work, zero tolerance. I'll take it, Trevor said immediately. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Mr. Pierce, or better yet, thank his daughter. She checks on your progress every month. Zara, his daughter who wasn't really his daughter anymore, still watching over him with more grace than he'd ever shown her. Trevor started writing letters, not to send, but to process his thoughts. Letters to Naomi, apologizing for specific things he'd done. Letters to Zara, telling her about his progress and what he was learning. Letters to his younger self, warning him about the man he'd become. Dr. Martinez encouraged it. You're building accountability, creating a record of your growth. That's important. As the year mark approached, Trevor realized something fundamental had shifted. He no longer resented Naomi's success or Julian's wealth. He no longer felt entitled to anything from them. He was learning slowly, painfully, how to be a man worth respecting. The Saturday before Trevor's 1-year anniversary at Pierce Industries, something unexpected happened at Mother's Grace Center. He was helping serve lunch when the main doors opened, and Naomi walked in. Trevor froze, the serving spoon hovering over a tray of mashed potatoes. In the year since the gala, he'd seen Naomi exactly twice, both times from a distance at Pierce Industries when she visited Julian's office. They'd never spoken. She looked the same, poised, elegant, even in casual clothes. But as she moved through the shelter, greeting staff and residents with obvious familiarity, Trevor realized she wasn't there because of him. She was there because she volunteered here too. Of course she did. Naomi had always had a servant's heart. It was one of the things he'd loved about her once before he'd become too selfish to appreciate it. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, ran up to Naomi. "Miss Naomi, you came. I promised I would, didn't I?" Naomi knelt down to the boy's level. "How's your mom doing?" "She got the job, the one you helped her apply for." "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of her." Trevor watched this interaction, seeing yet another piece of Naomi's life he'd never been part of. She'd built something meaningful here, helping women the way she'd once needed help. Their eyes met across the dining hall. For a moment, neither moved. Then Naomi said something to the boy and walked over to Trevor's serving station. "Hello, Trevor," she said calmly. "Naomi, I didn't know you volunteered here. I've been coming for 6 years. I heard you'd been assigned here as part of your employment conditions. I wasn't sure how you'd feel about seeing me." "I feel like I should apologize again," Trevor said, "for everything, for things I probably don't even remember doing, but you'll never forget." Naomi nodded slowly. "Mrs. Hughes sends me reports, monthly, about your progress, your counseling, your work here." She paused. "Julian doesn't know. I asked her to send them to me privately." Trevor's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because Zara asks about you," Naomi said simply. "She wants to know if you're really changing or just pretending. And I wanted to know too. Not for me. I moved on years ago. But for her. Because if you're genuinely becoming a better person, then maybe someday she can have some kind of relationship with you without it harming her." "I am changing," Trevor said, and he meant it. "I'm not the same man I was." "I see that," Naomi acknowledged. The Trevor I knew would never have lasted a year cleaning toilets. He would have quit, blamed everyone else, and stormed off in self-righteous anger. She tilted her head. "What's different?" Trevor thought carefully. "I stopped lying to myself. I stopped blaming you or Nicole or my parents or circumstances. I looked in the mirror and finally saw who I really was. A coward, a failure, and a man so insecure that I destroyed anything good in my life before it could expose my inadequacy." That's quite an admission. It's the truth. Dr. Martinez helped me see it. I wasn't ready to be a father because I was still a selfish child. I wasn't ready to be a husband because I didn't know how to love anyone more than I loved my own comfort. Naomi studied him for a long moment. "Zara wants to meet with you." Trevor's heart stopped. "What?" "She's been watching your progress, through me, through Mrs. Hughes, through her father. She's seen you working, volunteering, trying, and she wants to talk to you." Naomi's voice remained neutral. "Not to reconcile, not to call you dad, just to talk, to see for herself if the change is real." "When?" Trevor asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Her 13th birthday is in 2 weeks. She's having a small party at our house, just family and a few close friends. She asked if she could invite you. Not to the party itself, but to stop by beforehand for 30 minutes. Just her, you, and Julian present. Julian will be there. He's her father, Naomi said firmly. Of course he'll be there. If you're uncomfortable with that. No, Trevor interrupted. No, I'm grateful he'll be there. Zara should have her real father present. He struggled for words. I'm honored that she'd even consider seeing me. Naomi pulled a card from her purse and handed it to him. This is the date and time. Don't be late. Dress appropriately. And Trevor, her eyes locked onto his. If you hurt my daughter, if you make her doubt herself or feel less than, if you say one thing that wounds her spirit, Julian won't have to do anything. I will destroy you myself. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Trevor said. I won't hurt her. I swear. Naomi nodded once and walked away to continue her volunteer work, leaving Trevor standing at the serving station with trembling hands and a heart full of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, tinged with the appropriate amount of fear. 2 weeks later, Trevor stood outside the Pierce family home in Westchester County, holding a carefully wrapped gift and trying to control his breathing. The house was beautiful, colonial style, surrounded by old trees and perfectly maintained gardens. Nothing ostentatious, but everything spoke of taste and substantial wealth. He dressed in his best clothes, a new suit he'd saved for, bought from a department store sale. Nothing fancy, but clean and appropriate. He'd gotten a haircut, shaved carefully, and worn the cologne his counselor had helped him pick out. Dr. Martinez's voice echoed in his head from their last session. Remember, this isn't about you. It's about Zara. Let her lead. Let her set the boundaries. Your job is to listen, to respect, and to be honest. Trevor rang the doorbell. Footsteps approached, and the door opened to reveal Julian, wearing casual weekend clothes that probably cost more than Trevor's monthly rent. Trevor, Julian said with professional courtesy, you're on time. Come in. The interior of the house was even more beautiful than the exterior. Hardwood floors, family photos on every wall, children's artwork displayed with pride. This was a home, not just a house, the kind of place Trevor had never known how to build. They walked to a sunroom at the back of the house, where Zara sat in a comfortable chair, her hands folded in her lap. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair in natural braids. At 13, she looked even more mature than she had a year ago. Hi, Trevor, she said calmly. Hi, Zara. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Julian positioned himself slightly behind Zara's chair, present but not interfering, protective but allowing her space. I got you something, Trevor said, holding out the wrapped gift. For your birthday. It's not much, but I thought you might like it. Zara carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed in gold on the cover. I know you like science and research, Trevor explained nervously. I thought you might use it for notes or observations or whatever. The woman at the bookstore said it's the kind researchers use for field work. It's beautiful, Zara said, running her fingers over the leather. Thank you. An awkward silence followed. Trevor sat down in the chair Zara gestured to, aware of Julian's watchful presence. I want to know why, Zara finally said. Why you left. The real reason, not the excuses. Trevor took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. Trevor looked at his daughter, because she was his daughter, even if he'd forfeited the right to claim her, and decided that after a lifetime of lies, she deserved nothing less than complete honesty. I left because I was scared, he said simply. Not of being a father, of being inadequate, of being found out. Zara leaned forward slightly. Found out as what? As a fraud, as a man who had nothing real to offer. Trevor's voice cracked, but he pushed forward. Your mother loved me completely. She believed in me, supported my dreams, sacrificed for me. And I knew, deep down I knew, that I didn't deserve her, that eventually she'd see through me and realize I was just an insecure boy pretending to be a man. He looked down at his hands. When she got pregnant, it became real. I couldn't hide behind potential anymore. I'd have to actually be something, provide something, be responsible. And I panicked. I convinced myself the baby was a trap, that your mother was trying to tie me down, because that was easier than admitting I was terrified of failing you both. So you left before we could see you fail, Zara said quietly. Yes, and I failed anyway, worse than if I'd stayed. Trevor met her eyes. I failed at being a man, a husband, a father, a human being. I chose comfort over character, and I've paid for it every day since. Julian spoke for the first time. What's different now? Now I know that being a man isn't about never failing. It's about showing up even when you might fail. It's about putting someone else's needs above your own fear. Trevor looked at Julian with genuine respect. You showed me that. Watching you love them, protect them, build a life with them, you showed me what I could never figure out on my own. Zara was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she asked, "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Trevor said immediately. "I don't want to be called Dad. Julian earned that title. I don't want visits or relationship or to be in your life in any meaningful way. I just want you to know that your existence isn't a mistake, that you're extraordinary, and that my failure to see your worth says everything about me and nothing about you." Tears gathered in Zara's eyes. I needed to hear that. I needed to hear that it wasn't my fault. "It was never your fault," Trevor said fiercely. "You were innocent, perfect, deserving of everything. I was the broken one." Zara wiped her eyes and stood. Trevor stood too, uncertain. Then she stepped forward and briefly, awkwardly, hugged him. "Thank you for being honest," she whispered. "And thank you for changing. Maybe someday we can be in each other's lives more, but right now, this is enough." "This is more than I deserve," Trevor said, his voice thick with emotion. Julian walked Trevor to the door. "You've done well this year. Keep doing the work, keep being honest, and who knows, maybe in time, you'll become someone worth knowing." "That's all I want," Trevor said, "to become someone my daughter doesn't have to be ashamed of." 5 years later, Trevor stood in the audience at MIT's graduation ceremony, watching Zara cross the stage to receive her degree at 18 years old, the youngest in her class. She'd accomplished everything she'd set out to do, and more. Beside him sat his new wife, Carmen, a humble woman he'd met at a community service event. They had a 2-year-old son named Marcus. Trevor was teaching his son everything he'd learned the hard way, about showing up, about character, about what real manhood looked like. He'd been promoted 3 times at Pierce Industries. He managed an entire department now. Not glamorous, but honest work that he did with pride. From across the auditorium, Naomi caught his eye. She sat with Julian and their 3 other children, the family they'd built together. She nodded at him with something that looked like approval, maybe even respect. After the ceremony, Zara found Trevor in the crowd. She was radiant in her cap and gown, her future stretched out before her like a golden road. "Thank you for coming," she said, including Carmen and little Marcus in her smile. "I wouldn't have missed it," Trevor said. "I'm so proud of you, Zara." "I know you are," she said, and there was warmth in her voice, the beginning of something that might someday become real connection. Julian appeared, his hand protectively on Zara's shoulder. "We're taking family photos. Zara wanted to know if you'd like one picture together. Just the 2 of you." Trevor's eyes filled with tears. "I'd be honored." As the photographer positioned them, Trevor looked at his daughter, this brilliant, gracious, extraordinary young woman, and felt overwhelming gratitude. Not for biology, but for mercy, for second chances, for the wisdom of a child who'd chosen grace over bitterness. "Thank you," he whispered to Zara as the camera flashed. "Thank you for letting me be a small part of your story." "You were always part of it," Zara said. "You just get to be a better part now." Later, as Trevor drove home with Carmen and Marcus, he thought about the man he'd been and the man he'd become. The journey wasn't over. He'd never stop working to be better, to do better. But he'd learned the most important lesson. A man's worth isn't measured by his bloodline. It's measured by who he chooses to protect, to love, to become. Trevor gave Zara life, but Julian gave her a crown. And Trevor? He'd finally learned to be grateful for the difference. What did you think of Trevor's journey? Could you forgive someone who hurt you this deeply? Drop your comments below and let me know. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to change. Remember, real men build up, weak men tear down. Until next time, family.